Ladies and gentlemen, solitude is often misunderstood as loneliness, as though to be alone is to be incomplete or unloved. But to the inner world, solitude is the sacred ground upon which the self is discovered. In the silence of aloneness, without the distractions of noise, validation, or obligation, the psyche begins to stir. It is in solitude that we come face to face with our innermost thoughts, our unmet desires, our forgotten truth. The noise of the world often numbs this awareness. The voice of the collective, filled with shoulds, norms, and expectations, can drown out the subtle but powerful whisper of the self. In solitude, however, that whisper begins to rise, slowly at first, then clearer, and then urgently. It speaks not in words but in impressions, feelings, symbols, and sudden insights. To grow strong enough to be happy alone is to develop a relationship with the self that is deeper than any relationship with others. It is to no longer fear silence but to listen to it. Solitude becomes a kind of psychological mirror. It reflects not only who we are, but who we are not. The illusions we hold about ourselves, the masks we wear for others, and the roles we play unconsciously begin to fall away. What remains is the raw, unfiltered self, sometimes frightening, often unfamiliar, yet profoundly real. This is the self that is not constructed by praise or approval, nor destroyed by rejection or abandonment. It simply is. The journey into solitude also brings us in contact with the unconscious, the vast reservoir of thoughts, memories, instincts, and archetypal forces that lie beyond our awareness. In everyday social life, we rarely engage with this inner material. But in solitude, dreams become vivid, old emotions resurface, and forgotten desires emerge. This encounter can be unsettling, even painful, because it confronts us with what we have denied or disowned. Yet this discomfort is essential, for only by facing the unconscious can we begin to integrate it into consciousness, thereby growing into our full humanity. True solitude, therefore, is not just a lifestyle choice or a temporary phase, it is a rite of passage. It marks the beginning of a deeper transformation, one that leads to individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are beyond social conditioning and collective identity. This process cannot be outsourced, rushed, or borrowed from others. It must be lived alone and authentically. The strength to be happy alone arises not from arrogance or detachment, but from inner alignment. When we are aligned with ourselves, our values, our truth, our purpose, we no longer chase others to fill our emptiness. We carry a sense of fullness within. In this state, solitude becomes less of a void and more of a sanctuary. One begins to relish time alone, not as a retreat from life, but as life itself. The simple act of sitting quietly, reflecting, creating, or even doing nothing becomes profoundly enriching. Aloneness no longer equates to lack, it becomes space, space to breathe, to grow, to remember, and it is only from this place of wholeness that we can eventually return to others, not to complete us, but to complement us. In this way, solitude is not the end of connection, but the beginning of authentic relationship with others, with the world, and most importantly, with the self. Emotional dependency is often mistaken for love, attachment, or connection, but at its core it reflects an unconscious belief that one's well-being, identity, or value is reliant upon another person. This form of dependency is not always loud or obvious. It may hide behind gestures of affection, the need for constant reassurance, or the quiet fear of abandonment. When a person is not strong enough to be alone, they seek refuge in relationships not as a space to share life, but as a shield against their own inner emptiness. To grow strong enough to be happy alone means to dismantle this inner scaffolding and build emotional strength from within. The process begins by examining the psychological roots of dependency. Often, emotional dependence is not about the other person at all, but about unresolved inner wounds. abandonment from childhood, unhealed shame, or a fragile sense of self that was never properly formed. These internal voids project themselves outward, creating the illusion that another person holds the missing pieces of one's identity. We begin to think, without them I am lost, or I need them to feel complete. Such beliefs, while deeply human, are illusions that bind us to suffering and stagnation. They prevent the development of an autonomous self, one that can stand firmly in its own presence. Growing emotionally strong requires turning inward and assuming responsibility for one's inner world. This does not mean becoming emotionally detached or unfeeling. It means cultivating self-regulation, emotional awareness, and the capacity to soothe one's own pain. When you learn to sit with your sadness without needing someone to fix it, or to celebrate your joy without needing external validation, you begin to develop emotional sovereignty. This inner authority is the foundation of peace. No longer are your emotions held hostage by the behavior, attention, or presence of others. You become the guardian of your own psyche. Choosing to be emotionally independent is not about rejecting connection, but about purifying it. When you no longer need others to complete you, you can engage in relationships from a place of wholeness rather than hunger. Love, then, becomes an offering rather than a transaction. Friendship becomes a choice, not a necessity. And solitude becomes nourishing rather than threatening. You begin to see others not as sources of happiness, but as companions in a journey you have already owned. The quality of your connections improves because they are based on freedom, not need. This transformation also allows you to navigate life with greater resilience. Disappointments, betrayals, or losses, inevitable in the human experience, no longer destroy your emotional core. Instead of crumbling, you reflect. Instead of lashing out, you withdraw into introspection. You become a container vast enough to hold your own experience. You learn that while others may walk with you, the journey inward is yours alone. And it is this solitude of self that becomes the ground of genuine strength. Ultimately, emotional independence leads to freedom. Not the freedom from others, but the freedom to be yourself in any context, with or without company. You no longer need to be chosen to feel worthy, nor do you need to be seen to feel real. You exist firmly within yourself, not because you have walled off your heart, but because you have learned to live from it. This is the quiet, unshakable power of the emotionally self-sufficient individual. They are not untouched by life, but unbroken by it. They do not need others to survive, but when they love truly. The confrontation with the shadow is one of the most essential yet uncomfortable aspects of growing strong enough to be happy alone. The shadow represents all the parts of ourselves that we repress, deny, or hide, not only from others but often from ourselves. These aspects live in the unconscious, manifesting indirectly through patterns, projections, emotional triggers, or unexplained resistance. When we are constantly surrounded by others or absorbed in external distractions, we avoid facing these buried dimensions of the psyche. However, when we are alone, truly alone, these elements surface, sometimes gently but often with disturbing clarity. To be alone is to strip away the masks we wear. There is no one to perform for, no roles to uphold, and no social structure to affirm our image. This is when the shadow begins to emerge, not to harm, but to be seen. It may come in the form of restlessness, anxiety, envy, resentment, or self-loathing. These emotional states are not meaningless. They are messengers, indicating what within us remains unresolved or unloved. The discomfort we feel in solitude is often not about being alone, but about being faced with what we've long disowned. The impulse to distract ourselves, to reach for someone, to escape into activity. These are symptoms of our reluctance to meet the shadow. Integrating the shadow is a courageous and necessary task. It requires honesty, reflection, and the ability to sit with psychological tension without fleeing. To meet the shadow is not to destroy it, but to understand it. For example, when we recognize our jealousy, we may uncover an unacknowledged longing for recognition. When we confront our anger, we may reveal boundaries that have been repeatedly crossed. When we face our shame, we may discover where our self-worth was wounded long ago. Each piece of the shadow holds a fragment of truth, a key to deeper self-awareness and transformation. The process of integration does not happen all at once. It is gradual and cyclical. Each time we encounter our shadow, we are invited to reclaim a part of ourselves we have lost or rejected. This inner reconciliation expands the self, allowing for greater depth, clarity, and inner freedom. Importantly, the more we integrate our shadow, the less we project it onto others. Relationships improve because we no longer blame others for what we have not faced within. We become less reactive, less needy, and more capable of authentic connection. Moreover, integrating the shadow fortifies our emotional independence. When we understand our inner landscape, we are less likely to be manipulated or destabilized by external forces. We no longer seek relationships as a refuge from our own darkness, but as a space where both light and shadow can coexist. We become rooted, not because we are perfect, but because we are whole. The parts of us we once feared now serve us. They become sources of insight, compassion, and personal power. In solitude, when we make peace with the shadow, we begin to feel an inner coherence that cannot be given by anyone else. This coherence is not comfort in the conventional sense. It is strength, a strength born not of denial, but of deep self-knowledge. It is this strength that allows us to be truly happy alone, because we are no longer divided against ourselves. When the inner conflict is resolved, solitude becomes a sanctuary. We stand not in the absence of others, but in the presence of our true self, no longer haunted, no longer running, simply whole. Authenticity is the natural expression of the true self, but it is often sacrificed for the comfort of attachment. Many individuals remain entangled in relationships, social roles, or environments that no longer resonate with who they are, simply because they fear the consequences of walking away. This fear of rejection, abandonment, judgment, or loneliness keeps people bound to situations that slowly erode their integrity. The need to belong, though deeply human, can become a trap when it demands the suppression of one's inner truth. To grow strong enough to be happy alone requires the willingness to choose authenticity even when it costs attachment. There is a powerful psychological shift that occurs when a person begins to value truth over comfort. At first, this shift feels isolating. As one begins to express their real thoughts, values, and boundaries, they may experience resistance from others who were more aligned with their former, more compliant self. Relationships that were built on unconscious agreements to remain small, agreeable, or silent, often begin to crack when authenticity enters the room. This breaking point is necessary. It reveals which bonds were based on truth and which were rooted in fear, illusion, or dependency. To choose authenticity over attachment means to stop performing roles that are no longer aligned with one's evolving identity. It means no longer pretending to agree just to avoid conflict, no longer staying in environments that demand self-abandonment, and no longer seeking approval at the expense of self-respect. It is an act of reclaiming one's inner authority. And often this reclamation requires a season of solitude, a period in which the individual steps back from the external world to realign with their internal compass. This solitude is not empty, it is filled with clarity. As you strip away the layers of social conditioning and expectation, you begin to hear your own voice again. You remember what matters to you, what feels real, and what no longer fits. The decisions made from this space are not driven by fear, but by discernment. You no longer ask, will they approve, but rather, is this true for me? This is the ground of authentic living. The strength to choose authenticity also reshapes future connections. When you live in alignment with your truth, you naturally begin to attract people and environments that resonate with your real self. The quality of your relationships improves, not because you've become more agreeable, but because you've become more whole. You no longer need to edit yourself to be loved. Instead, you are loved for who you truly are. And when you are not, you are strong enough to walk away without collapsing into despair. This is not hardness or pride, it is emotional maturity. At its core, choosing authenticity over attachment is a spiritual and psychological act of liberation. It says, I would rather be alone and in integrity than surrounded and inauthentic. This inner stance is what enables true happiness in solitude. When you live from your truth, you are never truly alone, because you are in deep relationship with yourself. The fear of being alone fades, not because you've numbed yourself, but because you've come home to yourself. And in that home you find peace, not the fleeting peace of avoidance, but the lasting peace of alignment. Thus, the journey to be happy alone is inseparable from the journey of authenticity. The two grow together. As you become more authentic, solitude becomes less threatening and more empowering. You no longer seek others to define your worth, because your worth is self-evident. You no longer need attachment to feel safe, because safety has been found within. And when you do connect with others, it is not from need, but from truth. Individuation is the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are, not who you were told to be, not who society conditioned you to be, but the unique and whole being that exists beneath layers of external influence. It is the process of differentiating oneself from the collective and integrating all aspects of the self, both conscious and unconscious, into a unified identity. To grow strong enough to be happy alone, one must embark on this inner journey of individuation. It is not a path of isolation, but of deep internal integration. Through it, solitude transforms from a burden into a space of empowerment. In the early stages of life, identity is largely shaped by others. Family, culture, religion, and society all impose ideas of who you should be, how you should behave, what you should value, and what defines success. These roles and expectations serve a purpose in social development, but they also obscure the inner self. Many people spend their lives chasing goals, relationships, or images that were never truly their own, driven by unconscious beliefs inherited from others. The result is often a sense of inner conflict, restlessness, or emptiness, no matter how outwardly successful or connected one appears. Individuation challenges this inherited self. It calls you to step back, reflect, and ask, who am I apart from all of this? In the silence of solitude, these questions arise naturally. Without the constant presence of others reinforcing a particular role, you begin to observe your own thoughts, desires, and motivations with greater clarity. You start to notice which aspects of your life feel genuine and which feel performative. This self-observation is the beginning of transformation. It is not about rejecting the world, but about disentangling yourself from what is false, imposed, or outdated. The process of individuation involves confronting and integrating all facets of the selfing, including those that have been hidden, denied, or suppressed. It requires acknowledging both your light and your shadow, your strength and your vulnerability. It is a process of becoming psychologically whole, and this wholeness does not depend on external approval or validation. It emerges from within. When you are rooted in your authentic self, your sense of identity becomes stable, even in the absence of others. This is what makes it possible to be truly happy alone. not because you reject connection, but because your identity no longer depends on it. As individuation deepens, the need to seek completion in others diminishes. You begin to understand that no external relationship can substitute for the inner relationship with the self. This does not mean you avoid connection, but that your connections become conscious choices rather than unconscious needs. You are no longer drawn to people or situations to fill a void. Instead, you are drawn to what aligns with your truth. This shift is subtle but profound. It frees you from dependency, from self, betrayal, and from the endless chase for validation. Ultimately, individuation leads to a sense of inner coherence, a feeling that your thoughts, actions, values, and desires are aligned. This coherence is the foundation of peace in solitude. When you are no longer divided within, being alone no longer feels like a punishment or a deficiency. It feels like coming home. You begin to enjoy your own company, to create from your inner world, and to draw meaning from your existence independent of others. You become your own source of wisdom, your own companion, and your own guide. In this way, individuation is not just a psychological process. It is a spiritual journey. It requires courage, discipline, and patience, but it leads to the most profound kind of strength, the strength to stand alone without feeling incomplete. It is in this strength that true happiness in solitude is found, not as an escape from the world, but as a return to the self. Loneliness is a state many fear, yet it is often confused with aloneness. While loneliness is the painful sense of being disconnected from others, true aloneness, when consciously embraced, can be a gateway to inner richness. To grow strong enough to be happy alone means to transmute loneliness into something meaningful, to recognize that the absence of others does not equate to the absence of life, purpose, or connection. It is in solitude that the inner world has room to speak, to expand, and to deepen. The very feelings that once seemed unbearable in silence begin to transform into insight, peace, and creative vitality. When one is caught in emotional dependency or constantly surrounded by distractions, the inner world remains neglected, the psyche begins to atrophy from lack of attention. We become alienated not only from others but from ourselves. The fear of being alone at its core is often the fear of meeting oneself, of hearing thoughts we'd rather suppress or facing emotions we've avoided. But when solitude is chosen and met with awareness, it becomes a sacred opportunity. Instead of filling the silence, we listen to it. Instead of running from the discomfort, we sit within it. And in doing so, we discover that the silence is not empty, it is full of life. The experience of inner richness is not loud or dramatic. It unfolds slowly, like a subtle unfolding of presence. It might be found in a quiet morning, in the pages of a journal, in a walk without destination, or in the act of simply breathing with awareness. These moments, though small, begin to connect you with something timeless within yourself. You begin to experience your own company not as a burden, but as a gift. The restlessness fades. In its place arises a calm attentiveness, a sense of groundedness that no external relationship can provide. Creativity, reflection, and spiritual connection often blossom in solitude. These dimensions of human experience cannot thrive in constant noise and social entanglement. When you are alone, you begin to notice the patterns of your own thoughts, the rise and fall of your emotions, and the deeper rhythms of your being. You become both observer and participant in your own inner life. This awareness becomes a kind of inner compass, guiding you not based on trends or opinions, but on what truly resonates with your soul. Over time, this deepening relationship with the self brings a subtle but powerful transformation. You begin to feel full even when you are by yourself. You no longer look to others to complete your experience, but to enrich it. Relationships become supplements to your inner life rather than replacements for it. You can engage deeply with others while remaining rooted in your own presence. This balance creates a freedom in connection, one that is not based on clinging or need, but on mutual recognition and respect. The fear of loneliness begins to dissolve when you realize that solitude is not about what you lack, but about what you gain. You gain clarity, emotional independence, creative space, and spiritual depth. You become less reactive to the world and more responsive to your truth. The time spent alone no longer feels like empty space to be filled. It becomes sacred time to be honored. In this state, you are no longer waiting for someone to rescue you from yourself. You have become your own companion, your own healer, and your own source of fulfillment. Thus, to grow strong enough to be happy alone is not to close yourself off from the world, but to open yourself to a deeper world within. It is a process of remembering that your inner life is vast, valuable, and worthy of your attention. In that remembering, the fear of being alone dissolves, and in its place arises a profound sense of inner abundance, a richness that no one can give you and no one can take away.